Chapter 18. The Veil and the Flame. Islam, mysticism, and the elemental split. Religions do not end. They echo. The thread that began in Eden passed through Abraham, hardened in Sinai, fractured in exile, and burned again in the deserts of Arabia. Judaism, like a stone thrown into a lake, sent ripples across time, shaping not only itself but the forms that came after. Its longing for order, its trauma of dispersion, its purity codes and sacred maps, all would find their reflection in the next great voice of monotheism, Islam. But Islam did not emerge from nothing. It rose from the bones of tribal Arabia, yes, but also from the soil of the Hebrew prophets. The Qur'an itself acknowledges the lineage, calling Jews and Christians people of the book and claiming continuity, not rupture. Muhammad was not presented as a new light, but the final lamp on an ancient path. The Qur'an tells the stories of Moses, Joseph, Abraham, Noah, and Mary, not as foreign myths, but as spiritual kin. Islam did not erase Judaism. It absorbed it, mirrored it, expanded it. And in doing so, it inherited both its sacred geometry and its elemental fractures. The Hanifs, monotheistic seekers of pre-Islamic Arabia, already echoed the Judaic longing for unity. These wanderers rejected idols and tribal gods, searching instead for the one without name or image. When revelation came to Muhammad, it did not silence the Hanifs. It fulfilled them. The Qur'an sang with elemental rhythm. It called water the origin of life. We made from water every living thing, Qur'an 21:30. Earth was the clay of Adam, Qur'an 15:26, fire the essence of jinn, Qur'an 55:15, and wine the breath of divine command. This was not yet religion. It was rhythm, not yet doctrine, but elemental remembrance. And yet the pattern repeated. What Judaism had crystallized in law, Islam now encoded in revelation. What had once been tribal stories were now codified as eternal truths. And just as Judaism split spirit from matter, Islam too began to partition the sacred body. Earth, once a trust, became territory. Judaism's land-based covenant, its fixation on sacred borders, maps, and soil, was echoed in Islam's veneration of Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Like the priests of Israel, the jurists of Islam transformed earth into legal ground. Ritual purity laws, ablution, burial rites, food restrictions mirrored their Jewish antecedents. Circumcision became universal. Cleanliness became divine command. The feminine sacred sites of early Arabia, trees, wells, and stones associated with goddesses, were destroyed, echoing the Jewish reforms under King Josiah. The earth was no longer a lover. She was law. Water flowed with covenant. In both traditions, divine law was linked to purification through water. Mikveh became wudu. Ritual immersion became washing before prayer. The shared Semitic root of divine compassion, Ram womb, lived in both Hebrew and Arabic. But as Judaism centered the masculine god of judgment, Islam followed, refining the divine into 99 names, many masculine, few feminine. Women's voices, once present in Muhammad's early circle, were veiled or erased. The weeping mystics, like Rabia al-Adawiyya, preserved the watery soul of the tradition, but were marginalized by the rising tide of orthodoxy. Emotion, once seen as divine longing, became dangerous. Water pooled, but was no longer free to flow. Fire, once the internal will to purify, became externalized into conquest. Just as Judaism's prophetic fire had been institutionalized into temple priesthood and rabbinic law, Islam's jihad al-nafs, the struggle of the soul, was overshadowed by expansion and empire. The Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties burned across the known world in God's name, not unlike the tribal wars of the Israelites. The mystics who carried the inner flame, like Al-Hallaj, were crucified by their own people for daring to echo divine union. I am the truth. Fire, ungrounded in love, became sword. Air lost its breath. In Judaism, oral Torah had become rabbinic commentary, voluminous, intricate, intellectual. In Islam, the breath of the Qur'an was preserved, but rigidified. Ijtihad, independent reasoning, was closed in many schools by the 10th century. Recitation remained sacred, but interpretation was policed. Arabic, like Hebrew, was declared sacred, unchangeable, fixed. Philosophers like Avicenna and Averroes were exiled from orthodoxy. as Philo and Spinoza had been before them. Air, once a carrier of meaning, became doctrine without breath. And ether, the hidden thread of unity, was veiled again. Judaism's divine transcendence had already removed God from body and image. Islam followed, intensifying the unknowability of Allah. The mystics preserved what the jurists denied. Ibn Arabi taught that all creation was the breath of the merciful, Nafaz ar-Rahman, the same metaphysical womb found in the Kabbalistic Ein Sof. Both traditions shared the ache of exile and the yearning for return. Both birthed mystics who spoke of union, and systems that silenced them. The elemental body of Islam was thus formed not in isolation, but in mirrored evolution. It inherited Judaism's law, its architecture of transcendence, its patriarchy, and its spiritual trauma. Where Judaism had fractured the feminine, Islam cloaked her. Where Judaism feared idolatry, Islam destroyed the image. Where Judaism had sanctified the text, Islam elevated the recitation. The split deepened. But memory remained. Sufism, like Kabbalah, emerged as a rebellion of remembrance. Rumi whirled, Hafiz sang. Ibn Arabi mapped the layers of being. They did not reject Islam, they returned it to its origin. Not law, but love. Not conquest, but surrender. Not separation, but unity. In their gatherings, the elements were restored. Earth was danced upon. Water flowed through tears. Fire moved in zikr. Air vibrated through chant. And ether, once sealed behind veils, opened like a breath. Religion, when crystallized, forgets, but mysticism remembers. Judaism and Islam were born as echoes of each other, of something older, and through their mystics, the original rhythm still plays. The elemental wound is not Islam alone. It is carried through every tradition that chose structure over surrender. The task now is not blame, but balance. To let the fire return to the heart, to let water move again, to let earth be more than law, to let breath return, and to remember that ether, the space between all things, is not absence, but the divine waiting to be known. You are not outside of God, the mystics whisper. You are the breath through which God remembers itself. Even now. Even here. Even this.